Hi there, this video is about spatial variations to development, and our goal by the end of this video is to identify the spatial dimensions of development and looking at areas of rich and poor countries as well. So hopefully by the end of the lesson you'll be able to explain those spatial variations of development and then start to explain where the poorest and richest countries are around the world. So our key words that we're going to be really looking at are obviously spatial variation, and then I've got north, south, first world, second world, third world. There's some key words that we're going to be looking at today. When we link it back to the syllabus, we're looking, touching on what the nature of development is, as well as using indicators to illustrate spatial variations in the level and rate of development at a global scale. So let's start looking at some of those keywords again from the previous slide. We're looking at spatial variations. Now, spatial is all like to do with where things are, and variation is looking at the differences. So don't be put off by that word spatial variations. It might be a question in your end of year exam, or even in the HSC next year, but spatial variation is basically where things are and looking at the differences and similarities. So that's what spatial variations mean. Now obviously we're looking at development. Remember, development's that progression of a country based on another number of factors, and as we've already said, that the spatial variations of development across the globe is very different, even within countries. So that's what we mean by level and rate of development. So let's have a look. We've already explained what development is, and it's very hard to define. Is it even impossible? And it really depends what we're looking at, and that's what we mean by measurement, and sort of measuring how developed a country is, or even a region. So traditionally, when we've looked at development, we've looked at GNI, which is gross national income, GNP, which is gross national product, GDP is gross domestic product, and per capita income as well. Now, what these are figures, and they're normally in US dollars. They're in US dollars because that's the currency of the world, and basically they tell us the wealth of a country, and that's great if we're looking at economic development. But as we've already said in our definition of what development is, development's not just how rich and poor countries are, there are other elements as well. So when we talk about measuring development, we can use traditional indicators like the ones I've just said. However, they don't always tell a true story, and that's what we're going to look at. Again, so when we're looking at measurement and we're talking about other factors, this could be an indicator of how developed a country is. And as you can see, it's a happiness index. Now this is based on a rate of how happy people are. It's a general survey. And you can see in this choropleth map how the spatial variations, and there might be some when we look at the spatial variation, there might be some differences from using other development indicators like in the previous slide. So red is unhappy and light green is the happiest. And as you can see, we've got a lot of happiness in South America. If we looked at the previous slide and looked at the cartogram map which showed GNI, South America is sort of in the middle. There's a little bit of poverty, a little bit of wealth in there as well. Whereas we look at happiness, it's a completely different story. We've got the USA there, one of the richest countries in the world, is actually one of the unhappiest sort of countries in the world according to this happiness index. So when we're looking at development, it's not just about money, it's about other social, political impacts as well. And don't rule out stuff like happiness. Obviously we can question, what does happiness mean? Is it sort of access to well-being, access to social care? Is it access to education, that type of thing? And as you can see there, like places like India, Bangladesh, very, very happy, even though there might be relatively high levels of poverty there. So we need to take our measurement, our development indicators with a pinch of salt. Now, when we look at, if we can measure development, the patterns are very, very important. That's why, even the last sort of 2 slides, we've looked at those different maps and cartographs. The patterns are very, very important. And like I've said before, we've used traditional development indicators as GNI per capita to compare countries. And what you'll see, we've got here in this slide, we've got a map showing GNI. This is a chloropleth map. It's a shading of colours, so that's one way of looking at development. And you're going to look at some cartograms in the lesson where we get the shape of the countries distorted by data, and that really helps us identify those spatial patterns. So when we're looking at spatial patterns, in general, the rich countries are USA, Canada, in Northern America, and parts of Western Europe. So going back to the sort of the first slide, and we've got our key words. When we talk about where the spatial variations are, when we're talking about north and south, we are talking about north of the equator and south of the equator, and that's why we have that north-south divide, because with the exception of Australia and New Zealand, most of the developed countries with the high GNI, they are in the northern hemisphere, and they are part of the old first world. But what we're trying to do is get away from first world, third world, second world, because second world doesn't really exist now. And then you've got, obviously, third world is everyone else. But when we look at these patterns, we've got some exceptions like China, we've got South Africa, there's a developed country. In the Middle East, we've got some, Saudi Arabia there. If we look at the GNI, it is quite high, and that sort of north-south divide doesn't really exist now, because development's always changing, and countries are progressing, and it's not just based on traditional development indicators. Now, what we can do, we can get some sort of characteristics, and I've got a picture here of when I went with the school to Vietnam and Cambodia, and this is obviously, I'm just trying to show you what some people might associate to be with developing countries, poorer countries, and you can see that some different food staples there. So for many poor countries, there is a large percentage of the population who engage in subsistence activities. Remember, subsistence activities is like the type of employment this woman is doing. Obviously, she's trying to sell her product. She will sell enough just to make us, make ends meet. That's what subsistence activities mean. It's informal. So this is informal. So this woman, she only gets paid for what she sells. If she doesn't come into work, she doesn't get paid. Formal business is where you have a contract, like teaching, for example. That's an example. So poorer countries, a lot of people engage in subsistence activities. Simple home-based manufacturing, like this picture shows, small-scale informal business sector. That's what we mean by that. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in poorer countries is involved in that type of employment. There will be a number of people who have formal jobs, but in general, that's what we talk about. Also, like I've said before, there's many criticisms of using development indicators because they don't take into other accounts of sources of income like natural resources. We will see a lot of Africa is very, very rich in natural resources. However, they don't have the finance, or they don't have the trade links, the technology links to sort of use those natural resources. And like I said before, they do not show everyone's wealth. Going back to that previous slide with that woman, selling food supplies. Yet she's in an informal job, but that doesn't show her wealth. We haven't seen where she lives. We haven't seen like a bank account to give like an idea of her income. So everything is very generalized, and that's what we've got to be careful as geographers. Yeah, we can identify these poor countries, and we can look at lots of different development indicators which show those spatial patterns, but it's very generalized. And just because people are living in Africa doesn't mean that they're sort of backwards, or they're not happy, they're not all depressed. It's very generalized. So take everything with a pinch of salt, and don't judge a book by its cover. Now, to sort of give a good, like the best possible way of measuring development, we have the Human Development Index, which is developed by the United Nations Development Programme, and they try and use wealth as well as other factors such as happiness, access to education, and this is really the best possible way we can sort of look at spatial patterns. And as you can see, we've got very high countries as Australia, but look, we can see places in South America like Argentina, Chile, North America, Canada, and then parts of Western Europe. But we can see places in parts of Europe, parts of Middle East that are in that high to medium range as well, and that's really encouraging. Sort of looking at those spatial patterns. We can, though, however, see that no matter what development indicators we use, there are some places in Central Africa, parts of Asia that have sort of low development indicators, and they're our places where we need to help out the most. So overall, is development equal in a country? We're looking at spatial patterns, spatial variations. The answer is no. Even in developed countries, there is people living in absolute poverty. Geographers are concerned with those spatial patterns or spatial variations within the country as well as globally. So looking at that last slide, yeah, we can see that where the poorer countries are, but obviously take it with a pinch of salt. Remember, development is a difficult issue to define and explain, and it's very generalized as well. So when we look back at spatial variations, we get a generalized idea of where rich and poor countries are, and we can use a lot of different ways, different development indicators to see where these development sort of variations are. I hope that helps, and I hope that's explained to you what development is and what spatial variations are, and I hope you can use this video to make some really detailed Cornell notes. Okay, thanks for that, and make sure you like and subscribe to my video. Well done Year 11, keep going, doing a great job. Thanks, bye.